Hey, come here. You like pro wrestling? We got a little something for you. Two fans, 3,000 miles away. We each been watching for more than 30 years. Celebrate the art form, the action, the homoeroticism. We ain't rating matches. We ain't analyzing stories. We ain't experts. We just sit down, shut up, and mark out! Welcome, everybody, to yet another edition of Sit Down, Shut Up, Mark Out. I'm Blade Daly, and I am joined by my co-host once again, the best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be, the greatest Canadian pro wrestling podcaster in the history of Canadian pro wrestling podcasts. I am joined by the one, the only, hello.
Hi, Blade.
You are not Joshi G.
I am not. She is under the weather today, but I am her husband, Joshi J. How you doing, Blade?
Pretty great, dude. You're Joshi J and Joshi G. Is that for real?
That's for real. That's a shoot. That is a shoot, my friend. We are in this. We are in cahoots, and we're gonna talk about some AEW today, brother.
Yeah, amongst other things, my friend. My newfound friend. Like, what? Wow, it's like a family business. This is great. So Joshi J is joining me, Blade Daly, today. We are going to talk about a bunch of things, but I think the first thing we got to talk about, friendo, is how long have you been watching this shit?
Oh my goodness. It's funny because like my grandfather was like a huge wrestling fan back before, wrestling was catered to kids my age at the time. But the thing is, my parents, they actually were in a bowling league, and the arcade section in the back is where I usually hung out because, I didn't give a fuck about bowling. I thought it was boring as hell.
It's bowling, yeah.
So they would just give me some quarters to get me to run off and not bother them. And there were two games back there that I poured their money into. One was The Simpsons. That Simpsons arcade game, man, me and my arcade buddies must have beat it 100 times. But the other one that I pumped a lot of money into was the WWF arcade game at the time. And the guy that really stood out to me that pulled me into wrestling was none other than the Ultimate Warrior.
Bro, we're right there with each other. He was the guy that lightened me up to wrestling. And yes, I was like, he's going to say the Ultimate Warrior because he was so awesome in that game. Yeah,
he was. He stood out. And I mean, I didn't want to be like everyone else, like, Hulk Hogan. Everyone liked Hulk Hogan. But I mean, Ultimate Warrior, he was the other guy. He had that kind of edge to him. He was the cool dude. At least I thought so at the time. And I mean, Ultimate Warrior was really my first favorite wrestler. I even wanted to. I remember I must have been like 8 or 9 years old when I first got into it. And yeah, I wanted to grow up and be something like the Ultimate Warrior, in wrestling. But I got away from it for a little while. And I came back in 1997 when it really picked up. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the Attitude Era was really whenever I really got, I fell in love with wrestling, where I was like reading about the history of wrestling and everything like that. And it's been my passionate hobby ever since, for sure.
That's awesome, man. And I mean, I have the exact same story. Like Warrior caught my eye. I bought a WWF magazine that was reviewing SummerSlam 89. And so I was 9 years old. And, I grew up on He-Man. I grew up on Thundercats. I grew up on that shit. And that's what the Ultimate Warrior is. He was those things for real. Like he was the real embodiment of those things. So turns out he's a piece of shit. But, that was just a disappointment for another time. And so...
Yeah, no kidding, right?
Yeah, but Warrior was the guy, and so he pulled me in, and I was exactly the same. I was like, everybody likes Hulk Hogan. Fuck this guy. It was like, maybe the first anti-establishment thing I ever did in my life was...
Yeah, you might be right. I might be the same, honestly.
Yeah, I picked the Warrior instead, and I got WrestleMania 6 was the first pay-per-view I ever watched live, and I had all my little buddies over, I had all my little buddies over, and I was the only person rooting for Warrior.
Oh,
Everybody
man.
else was rooting for Hogan, and I'm like, you're all fucking lame.
Lame.
Yep. And when Warrior won, I was like, yes! And they were all upset and like near tears. It was great. So what promotions at this moment have got you in their grips the most?
Well, I mean, ever since I really started like following it on a regular basis. I think it was like 2018. New Japan has been consistently my favorite promotion ever since. Even now, I mean, I love AEW. There would not be an AEW without New Japan, first of all.
Very correct. Yes.
And but I do love AEW. It's very, very close. They're neck and neck. But those are the two promotions that I always keep up with. And you know, I go the other stuff I fill my wrestling time with is usually going back and watching some of the really old stuff. We'll talk about some of that later on in the show.
Yes, we
but
will.
I mean, like, I'm a really big historian buff when it comes to, you know, wrestling history, going back way before the WWE or WWF, sorry. Way before all of that, you know. I'm more interested in the history in those days than watching the wrestling, because I'm not gonna lie, the wrestling is pretty damn boring.
It's really boring. It's really boring.
If you can make it through more than 3 matches a day, you're doing better than me, I can tell you that. But the history is super interesting, for sure.
Super interesting. Well, we got that and a whole bag of chips coming at you, folks. We're going to hit some music right now, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about some AEW.
Yeah.
All right, we're back, baby. And first things first, you know, you said something before we threw the music there. I think AEW is the closest thing to New Japan in America that could ever be mass marketed. Like,
oh, for sure.
It's the closest thing.
They speak the same language.
Yeah.
Same language.
Yeah, New Japan itself could never get this much market penetration in America. You know, like the way they tell stories and stuff. I love New Japan. Like, New Japan.
It's a very slow burn. It's a very slow burn. In New Japan.
Is. With a lot of the story being told in the ring too. I mean, it's just a different thing. It's like career rivalries and stuff like that are the focus, you know. And
it's not the same as like if you're used to the other company's way of doing things, where it's very bang bang and you're shelling out a different rivalry with the same people every 2 or 3 months, and you know, it's a lot more long term wise, and AEW commits to that, and I feel in a very similar way that the New Japan has always done.
Yeah, well, and like and I think that's sometimes when people say AEW doesn't tell stories or doesn't tell good enough stories or whatever, it's like, you know, like, for instance, in New Japan, everybody loses, right? Like, there isn't Superman, doesn't exist in New Japan. Okada was kind of the preeminent guy that, but he lost a couple times a year at the very least, you know. He was never undefeated, you know.
Like, he can't sweep G1 every year, obviously. So
right, I mean, they kind of tried those last few years he was there.
Not every year.
Yes,
he did some years.
He did, yeah. But in WWE, they do that superhero booking where it's like, if you're the guy that nobody ever beats you and nobody ever, you know, and it's the story of, you know, a personal rivalry trying to take this guy down, and maybe someday somebody will, and it's Cody taking Roman down or whatever. And that's not really the way AEW works. And so
thank God.
I honestly, it's so much more sports based to have people lose sometimes, and to have people have to kind of come back, and sometimes they're at their very best and sometimes they're not. That's actually like what sports is, you know?
Yeah, it's not the worst thing to be disappointed sometimes.
Totally.
I mean, what's the win gonna, how good could the win possibly feel if that's all that ever happens?
Right. Well, what also wasn't disappointing was last week's Collision. We're going to talk a lot about it because Collision is finally starting to feel like a proper companion show to Dynamite, where they're on similar levels. And last week's episode was a great example of that, I thought. You know as well as I do, Collision had started off, and it started off strong, and just like Rampage, it slowly descended into becoming this kind of weird alternate universe where the House of Black lived, and FTR lived, and Ricky Starks lived, and Miro lived, but they weren't on Dynamite, and it was just kind of like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
You know, it was just weird, and the matches were great, but they didn't mean anything because that was its own universe. It was FTRville, you know, and it just didn't really carry over. And every once in a while you'd swerve or somebody would show up on Collision. You'd be like, oh, wow. But like, I don't think that's what you want. Right. And now that they're on Max, it feels like Tony's got a little more motivation to make Collision matter more. And, you know, I think having the ability to instantly replay it obviously makes a big difference too. And so, Collision this last week, I thought was really strong. And we're going to talk about some of the standout moments from last week's Collision and this week's Dynamite. I really loved I'm just enjoying the continued focus on Hobbs and on Big Bill. Hobbs is a guy who always gets a little bit of steam and then they kind of forget about him.
Yeah.
And since he's come back, I thought, you know, if it was going to happen again, it would have happened after the Moxley match. But they immediately put him into something else. And this brawl between these guys was a lot of fun to watch. I mean, just two big motherfuckers beating the shit out of each other.
Well, Hobbs is exactly what you want in that kind of brawler because, first of all, like he's a little bit like Brian Cage, but he's a hell of a lot more interesting. Mm-hmm. He isn't scared of the freaking camera. You know, he's the real deal. When you want, you know, meat and you want somebody that's going to, you know, go in there and just lay the wood and it's still going to come off, you know, even in defeat, like a force all the time. I can't say enough good things about Powerhouse Hobbs. Ever since he's debuted in AEW, he's never reached, you know, a particularly high level of success consistently, like you said, but he's consistent in the ring. At least he always delivers, and I don't know, I'm looking forward to AEW finally getting traction with a guy, hopefully later this year finally.
Yeah, well, and even in the loss to Moxley, you know, it took like how many finishers and interference and all that shit to finally put him down. If you're gonna like put somebody up on that like Atlas, like kind of like herking Hulk of a person scale who can kick out of almost anything, it's Hobbs. And also seeing Big Bill on his own is nice. Like, and they're finally teasing the obvious breakup thing that's going to happen for Bill. And I'm happy for him. He needs to get the fuck away from Chris Jericho. I love Chris. He was one of my very favorite wrestlers for 25 years, and I'm just over it. Just get Big Bill away from him, and then Brian Keith eventually. So Big Bill, Hobbs beat the shit out of each other. Hobbs is bleeding all over the place. They end up Hobbs belly to bellies Bill off the stage through a table. Just insane shit. Super fun. Joshi and I talk every single fucking, you know, I'm going to call you guys G and J. So G and I talk every single week about wanting more women on the shows. And a lot of the women we complain about not seeing were in a match together, essentially, on Collision. It was Deonna, Queen Aminata, Yuka Sakazaki, and Serena Deeb. And they were all in a match against each other with the winner facing Mercedes Moné on Dynamite this week. And I was very pleased that Yuka Sakazaki got the win. Harley Cameron comes out to distract Deonna. Harley is officially turning babyface, and nobody's gonna boo her. So, like,
no,
this was this was an absolute must. She distracts Deonna long enough for Yuka to sneak a pin in. It's great, and I think it's setting up something to build to Australia. Deonna is, you know, you and I were talking before we started recording. You know, she's obviously a very credible wrestler and been a world champion in TNA and in ROH. And it's kind of weird to see her be this kind of worker gatekeeper figure right now.
That's kind of third wheel they got her doing. I mean, it's been kind of a constant with her, but I mean, she is she's more vocal than the most of them on social media anyway.
Yes.
Whenever that's the thing, like with Deonna, it's hard for me to even realize that she's not as prominent on TV as she used to be when she was, like you said, in TNA and everywhere else. But she still maintains a presence. She's very good at that. I'll give her that. Like, you don't forget that she's there. And Yuka as well. I mean, I've been a Yuka fan ever since I saw her the first time. I mean, her match with Mercedes, and we'll get to that later from the Dynamite. I mean, that was just amazing. I mean, I'm not sure that crowd deserved it, but but I mean, but you're right. Those it was good to see like the whole gang together.
Well, and I think if you want to get more women on the show, stop just having one singles match every week. You know, obviously we want more than just one match, but if you're going to do one match, make it a multi-woman match. You know, have people competing with stakes. I think that's a huge part of it. Yes, you can have backstage segments and other stuff, but ultimately we want to see more of these women wrestling. And
for sure,
40 women under contract in one match. Come on. A week.
And I mean, it's television, man. I mean, like, these one-on-one matches can wait for the pay-per-views. I mean, that's what
I totally agree.
They are for. These television, free TV, you know, Dynamite, Collision. This is the time to do these kind of matches where you put like everybody, you squeeze everybody you can into these matches. I'm not saying every damn match on the card needs to be a freaking 4-on-4 tag match, but that's not to say you don't want to have those. I mean, why not? Especially whenever, you know, AEW was having issues with the network, even having more than one woman's match on a show. I mean, that would have you would have expected them to have been doing it more then. They weren't, you know. Right. So I mean, I agree. I think that they could stand to do a lot more of that, especially on Collision. You know, put more faces on TV. You know, like keep the crowd familiar with them, because the last thing you want to do is, like, you know, go a couple of months and then, you know, the fans new fans come in that don't know, and the fans that like were there kind of started to forget about them. That's the worst thing, that the position AEW could put these women in. So 100%. the more they can put them on TV, the better. Always.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think you made a great point, is like, hey, the one-on-one matches, you know, if you're going to have less matches, the one-on-one matches, do them on pay-per-view, do them on the big specials, but don't ostracize 38 people from television. And you know, have these multi-women matches, because that's how these women can catch fire. You know, Harley Cameron doesn't get any momentum if she's not on TV, and you put her on TV, you show what she's best at, which is being entertaining, and her wrestling is catching up to how entertaining she is right now. And she's improved a lot, and I have no doubt that would happen with others too. You know, put them in the best light possible, have people focused on the women's division, putting it together. And I think, you know, I don't know how the creative works behind the scenes at AEW at all, but like, I do think they're hearing the feedback, and finally, and I think we just got to keep it up. We got to keep it up. It's not, nobody hates AEW. It's just like, come on, we know you can do better. Speaking of better, I think the Hounds of Hell, I already kind of like them better than the House of Black. It
helps that their leader is on TV. That's a big part of it.
Yeah. I was a fan of the House of Black for a while, and then I lost all interest in them because it was so clearly like none of them were challenging in singles matches except Julia. Julia is the best thing that ever came from the House of Black, in my opinion. Because Brody and Buddy were just kind of the ominous guys who stood behind Malachi. He never wrestled in singles matches. Everybody
Which is a crime itself, by the way, because Brody King could be doing a hell of a lot more. I was even talking with Joshi G about this a couple of weeks ago, whenever we were talking about how disgusted we were with Bullet Club right now and in JPW. Someone like Brody King, my God, would be a so much better leader for that faction. I mean, he looks legit. He looks like a freaking leader. I mean, I think that is another guy that they could have they could really be doing a hell of a lot more with. But you're right, Julia has certainly got the rub from the House of Black far more than even Malachi did.
Oh,
I mean, the last couple of years, you know.
Well, and I think it's the most unselfish thing Malachi did the whole time he was there was he created Julia, who was going nowhere. She was very young, but like, being a cheerleader for the Varsity Blondes wasn't really going anywhere. So
I mean, it was cute. It was
cute.
You know,
I really liked their entrance music, to be honest.
Yeah, it was kind of throwback in its own way. In its own way. I mean, those kind of things are, they're necessary. It's a tag team that just has a nice presentation, but you don't really take them seriously. They just kind of look good on TV. That was good to get her going. But you're right. I mean, compared to what she's doing now, I mean. she has been amazing in the House of Black, and now I look forward to seeing where this goes with her, because I really think sooner than later they are going to be pushing her to at least a TBS championship. She'll probably definitely cross paths with Monet later this year.
Yeah, well, and
honestly, dude, I wouldn't even be surprised if she ends up being the one to dethrone her, so Mercedes can move up to the main title. So
well, one of them is going to move up sooner than later. I think it could be Julia going into the world title division. I mean, I could see that happening, but I also think the Hounds of Hell and this tag team or possible singles runs that you could have for Buddy and Brody, I'm just looking forward to the world seeing what these guys can do. Brody King wrestled in Defy out here, the indie out here in Seattle, a lot before he went to ROH and then AEW. And I became a huge fan of his. Through that, I've watched his career unfold. He's amazing. And this guy can do so much more than he's been allowed to do. And I think he's a guy you could put in the world title division and instantly be legit. But Buddy, looking forward to that as well. They teased Buddy versus Okada on this show. I'm looking forward to it. I don't think Buddy's beating Okada, but that's going to be a damn good match when it happens.
It's going to be a very good match. I mean, Okada is not going to let you down. That's for sure. Even though he's a little bit older than he was from during those 6.5, 7-star matches in New Japan.
Right.
I mean, he's still got so much gas left in the tank, and it's going to be amazing to see what they're going to do with him whenever they kind of drop the comedy act down a little bit and turn up the Rainmaker. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Well, and I think he can. I think Okada's. I'm not saying you are, but like I've seen other people online talk about, wow, Okada's just not the same guy anymore. And it's like, probably not to some degree, but like, you don't think this motherfucker can turn it right back on? Like,
yeah, right.
You saw that match with Ospreay at World's End, right? Like,
for sure.
And he wrestled Ricochet earlier that same night. He was amazing. And so this guy still has a ton of gas left in the tank.
Oh, for sure.
So very much looking forward to that. We had an awesome, and Jay, I got to say, this was one of my favorite parts of the show. The Don Callis family has this like this council of supervillains meeting.
I don't know what it is. You just mentioned Don Callis, and I'm just like, it makes me smile because he's so. He's always one of my favorite parts of every show he's on.
I know, the human thumb, Don Callis, or the toe, or the. I've called him an in-process circumcision. I mean, he is one of those things, if not all of those things. And these guys are sitting around a table. Callis is walking around in a robe with a big. With a glass of wine. They're talking about how they're going to take down Kenny Omega. I think in that 3 or 4 minutes, they did more to make Kenny Omega the Superman of AEW than they've ever done. Like, you got this like group of guys who have to take him down. They hinted that there's more than 5 of them. A lot of people online I saw speculating that it's Kota Ibushi, which would be cool. But I think it could be the Young Bucks. I think there's a chance. I'm not sure, but he never said if there's 6. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so your mind wanders. I don't know. It might be Ibushi, but man, I hope Ibushi can go. You know, I hope he's actually gotten all the surgeries he needs because
he's been away. It's like so long now. It's almost impossible. It's impossible, flat out impossible to even speculate because we're gonna have to see whenever he comes back. What you know, how after his recovery and see where they can go with him because they never really got anything going with him before he was injured. So it's like you don't even have a basis to really start with. You know what I'm saying? When he comes back, he's really going to be debuting, you know,
in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways. And hopefully he just has more mobility. And, you know, I know he didn't get the treatments that he needs before he came back this last time, before he got hurt again. And hopefully he does because I think he could get his body in better shape. You know, he obviously didn't look like the same guy in the ring or just body wise. I'm hopeful that we, you know, I don't think he'll ever look like 2019 Kota Ibushi again. That is not possible. He looked like fucking David, like carved out of stone, but like.
He's a totally different person now than he was back then because it's not just his physical injury that, you know, it's changed Kota Ibushi since then. I mean, the way things ended between him and New Japan there's just no way that didn't take a toll on him mentally either.
Right.
You know, so I mean, you're going to be getting, it is going to be a different Kota Ibushi. Now, whether it's going to be a lesser, you know, version of Kota Ibushi, that remains to be seen. I'm not going to speculate on that just yet because, like I said, we have nothing to really stand on at this point. But I hope for him, and I hope that whenever that he does come back to AEW and they really get the ball rolling with him, that he can show a new audience what he was about in New Japan and everything that made him so special over there right before the COVID era, you know, kind of stopped everything there.
Yes. So we have this awesome, you know, promo. Definitely go check it out on YouTube. And then we have a main event that I thought was so badass. You know, Tony just casually drops this shit on X or whatever platform, and then it gets shared everywhere. And he just casually drops that, you know, Konosuke Takeshita, one of the best wrestlers in the world, is going to face, you know, Katsuyori Shibata, you know, one of the greatest of all time in the ring. Just, you know,
by the way.
You know, oh, by the way. Yeah, exactly. And this match lived up to it. I thought it was great. It's maybe the most engaged as physically that I've seen Shibata since he's come back. You know, I know at first he was being pretty protective of himself, and rightfully so. That's the most important thing. But he's slowly gotten a lot more comfortable, and this was one of those examples. And you know, obviously Takeshita gets the win clean, but this was a great match, man.
Oh, he's dusted off now. He's going hard, and I think that 2025 is going to be a very, very good year for him. Like he's already off to a very good start, and he couldn't be with. I don't think he could be in a better position with the Callis family to really take him where he needs to go.
Yeah, Takeshita like strapped the rocket to this guy, future world champion. At this point, it's almost like just of which promotion. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, he's already
kidding, right?
Yeah, he's already been the DDT champion. Like, but he could be the world champion in New Japan. He could be the AEW world champion. This guy gets an organic reaction that is unbelievable when he shows up. And
listen, that is over here. Can you imagine what kind of reaction he's going to get when he starts doing more shows in New Japan?
Right.
Like,
right.
Oh my goodness.
The only guy I can ever think of who's been signed to 3 promotions at the same time. Like, that is unbelievable. He's signed to DDT, New Japan, and AEW all at once, and rightfully so. And hopefully maybe it changes the way this works a little bit, you know? So that was Collision. We're going to hit the music. We're going to come right back. We're going to run through what I considered to be a bang average Dynamite, and I believe you did too. But let's listen to some nice tunes for a minute, huh? Okay, we're back. Now, Dynamite, as I said, it was fun this week. It wasn't exceptional. And you know what? Sometimes that's just the case. It's pro wrestling, folks. Every single week there's a new episode. And, they can't all be 10s, right? They can't all be 9s. They can't all be 8s. This was like a 6.5, in my opinion. And so we'll talk about the highlights real quick. Mr. J, I am loving this Kenny Omega, Will Ospreay, Callis family story. These guys are a dream team. There's not many teams I can think of outside of maybe like Mariah May and Toni Storm or Hangman and Swerve that are like dream tag teams that I just desperately want to see. But they've given us one with Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay. Will beat he beat Brian Cage. Actually pinning some people now with the Styles Clash. He's like, you know what, AJ, if you're not going to use this shit anymore to beat anybody, I'm going to do it. And he beat Brian Cage. Then they get their ass beat by the entire Callis family. That was kind of the end. But, man, how do you feel about it?
Well, with Ospreay and Omega, I think that it's shaping up to be kind of that same kind of angle we see a lot with with two very athletic wrestlers that are established as singles wrestlers, teaming up temporarily, running roughshod over the division, possibly even winning the tag championships, and then something's gonna happen probably later on in 2025, far at the end of the year, maybe even next year, and then they're gonna end up going at it one-on-one sometime at a big pay-per-view. I know Macho Man Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan is one classic example that comes to mind immediately. I wouldn't be surprised if they took that route, and in the end, much like that, that partnership did for Randy Savage, I think it's going to elevate Ospreay. It's going to bring him up to the next level and put him into a position where he's going to really be considered like a legendary status with Kenny Omega.
Yeah.
And I know for a lot of wrestling fans that have been following this dude since New Japan, to a lot of people, Will Ospreay's already a living legend.
Yeah.
But I really liked the point Kenny Omega made last week, whenever he came back and he told Will Ospreay very, very coldly, like you were only seen as good as you are because I wasn't here, kind of type thing. And I think that was a really good seed to plant, because the way this match ended this past Wednesday on Dynamite, you can kind of see there's a little bit of bromance between them right now, but I think they're going to go back to that eventually. And when this is over, you're going to get another really, really stellar match between Ospreay and Omega, like they've already had a lot of in New Japan. But that's my immediate gut feeling of where this partnership is going to be headed. But the match with Brian Cage was good. It was a good way to kick off Dynamite. A hell of a banger match to start the night off for sure.
Yeah. I don't think I really hope we don't see these guys in the tag division like with any kind of regularity. Like, I want this to be more of like, hey, we need to stop the Callis family from stopping Will and Kenny from entering, they need to wrap that up, but wrap it up so that both these guys can go do single stuff. My hope is one of them ends up as the champ and the other one challenges, and we end up, whether it's, 6 months from now or a year from now, we end up with the third match, and Will maybe gets to prove to Kenny he can beat him without any help. I think that's the big hanging Chad, if you will, from their previous encounter. So we go backstage. Renee Paquette is outside Swerve's locker room, and Hangman just walks into the shot and opens it up and walks in and goes, you know what? He's not in there. And he just walks away, bumps into MJF. They continue to tease something going on with MJF and Hanger. I'm all about that. I would love to see more of that. MJF cuts a probably the most MJF fun promo I've heard him do in a while, where he's like, why does this guy get to just do whatever he wants when I say anything and everybody, and then he's like, oh, sorry, ADD. And he kind of goes back to this Jarrett thing, and I started rolling my eyes. Yeah. But I like that they're kind of teasing this tier of guys like Hangman and MJF. I'm sure Swerve will be included in that. These are the guys that are kind of like who may have to team up to take the Death Raiders down. Like, ultimately, what's Hangman going after with Swerve? He didn't look like a guy who was out to kill anybody. He looked like he was looking for him to talk to him about something. I'm curious to see where that goes. But holy shit, that was cool. I really enjoyed that. It was actually one of my favorite parts of the show.
And I mean, all three of those guys are going to be world champions again. Maybe some of them later this year. Who knows? I certainly think Swerve should be, but for the time being, it only makes sense to kind of keep them grouped together so they are regarded as in the same tier, like you put it. And I mean, I think this is the perfect situation for them to be in right now. But it's going to change later this year for sure.
It will. No, but I mean, and we'll get to him in a minute, but them, Jay and Jay White are kind of like, guys, just develop these guys. Keep going. Like, that's your main event tier. I love Darby Allin. I love, a lot of these other guys that people have thrown around as potential world title guys. But come on. You got Kenny Omega. You got John Moxley. You got Jay White. You got Swerve. You got Hangman. Make those other guys earn it. They haven't earned it yet.
No, not by a long shot. And I love Darby, man, but I mean he can go climb Mount Everest as many times as he wants. Right. He's not gonna be over with the AEW audience until he starts delivering the same kind of quality that the Stricklands and the the Ospreys of the world are providing for that show right now.
Yep. Jeff Jarrett lost to Claudio, and I'm just gonna say good. Some are mad that the Death Riders interfered. Personally, I don't give a shit. Love the result. And just let's keep Jeff Jarrett out of the world title picture, huh?
Oh, man. What a relief.
Yeah. I was sure Jeff was going to win by some shenanigans from MJF or something. And I just get him the fuck away from the world title. Like, I'm not even mad that he's on TV necessarily. I'm just like, that is a terrible use of Jeff Jarrett. Don't have that going on. I would prefer he wasn't on my TV, but I'm not like irate that he is. Like, just come on, don't drag this Death Riders thing into the dirt any more than kind of already have. So, yeah.
I'll tell you on that. Like, the thing is with Jeff Jarrett is like, I mean, I agree. I mean, I don't hate the guy. In fact, when we went to our first AEW show, the first time AEW came to Canada, we were in Winnipeg to see it. And I'm going to be honest, man, the best match on the card that night was Jeff Jarrett versus Juice Cassidy. I mean, it was Orange Cassidy. Sorry. Orange Cassidy. But yeah, Orange Cassidy and Jeff Jarrett put on a banger of a freaking match that night. And it wasn't just because of Cassidy. I mean, Jarrett was very good in that match. It's just, it was a bit of a one-off, and putting him on the card, man, like every damn time, every night, it's a bit much, especially at his age,
Yeah, well, and especially when you have this outcry about women and all these other things, and then you're putting Jeff Jarrett on your TV and acting like he's a legit world title guy. Like, no, he's not. Come on, chill the fuck out. Ricochet and AR Fox, however, had a very, very fun match. Man, Ricochet as a heel is so much fun. He does a lot of little things that I think people don't even notice. I mean, there's the obvious shit, the scissors, and he acts like a dick, and he does the aha thing, but like him as a heel, like when Fox like puts him in an armbar or a headlock or anything, he squeals and screams like a little girl. He doesn't care about looking like a total coward or a total wimp. And I think that makes him a much more effective heel.
Yeah, Ricochet, I mean, Ricochet, I mean, especially since he's debuted, he didn't take a lot of time to really turn it on. I mean, of course, it helped that he came to AEW directly from the other show, but I mean, so he was already pretty established with, I think, the mainstream American audience at that point. But they didn't waste any time with him, and Ricochet is just phenomenal in the ring. And AR Fox, I mean, he's a hell of a worker. And I mean, them putting him on, he's one of those guys that they need to keep using on the weekly television shows. He's going to get established eventually. It won't happen this year, but I think a couple of years down the road, AR Fox is they're going to turn him into something special. I feel it.
He's one of the greatest athletes I think I've ever seen in the history of wrestling, that I've watched, where it's like this guy can kind of do anything. And his offense is so unique, and those weird, and not in this match, but somebody's standing on the outside and he runs and he vaults backwards off the ring post and does like an acai moonsault kind of looking thing.
It's freak shit, man.
It's freak shit. Like, no, who even thinks that way? Like, yeah, keep Fox on the TV. Like, I'm really, really enjoying it. Him, it seems like he might have been in the doghouse for a while, but he loses. Ricochet then pulls the golden scissors out from the bottom turnbuckle. And just as he's about to seemingly lay waste to Ricochet, he falls to the ground, and you see that Swerve Strickland has him by the feet. Swerve was sworn not to interfere in the match, but as soon as the match is over, he starts beating that ass, Joshi J, and lays it on pretty good until Ricochet manages to get the upper hand, not by beating him, but by taking AR Fox hostage with a pair of scissors. And Swerve is kind of forced to lay off. It looks like Ricochet's using a pair of golden scissors the way somebody else would use a gun. Hilarious. And just feeds into the desperate nerd energy of Ricochet even more. I'm really looking forward to that match next week.
Yeah, I think I mean both of these cats. I mean, they're going to turn it up, and I wouldn't be surprised if they kick the show off with that, honestly, because it seems like the perfect kind of thing AEW has been doing lately. They like to really kick the show off with a freaking banger. Yeah, they don't waste any time. They like to get it going early, almost like a Megadeth CD. They just like put a freaking like one of the hardest bangers on the album right up front, just like get right into it. That's the attitude they have, and I think that's a perfect match to start with.
100%. We're just gonna kind of plow through these next few things here. Switchblade and Yuta had a great match, I thought. Some people I saw said Yuta got too much. I disagree. Why is he in the Death Riders if he's not a legit threat? Jay White sold like a master. After the match, Jay White wins, and Adam Copeland and FTR run in to make the save when the Death Riders jump Jay White. The main message I get from this is I loved seeing how uncomfortable Jay White was accepting the help of Copeland and FTR. He sold it so realistically. And then I loved that he's still in the main event scene, and he's obviously still being booked as a threat to Jon Moxley, ultimately. And I thought Yuta having a showcase was great.
Well, I mean, Yuta is obviously the D'Lo Brown of this faction. And you need somebody like that because, the fact to say the guy doesn't belong in the faction, first of all, anyone saying that doesn't understand how a fucking faction works. You absolutely need somebody like that in your faction. D'Lo Brown himself would tell you as far back as when he was with the Gangsters. Yeah. You can hear it in Dark Side of the Ring. He openly admits, I'm the guy you can beat, so we can keep this going. So eventually Moxley can take on somebody and platform off of that same match. And that is the purpose Yuta serves for this faction right now. He is doing a hell of a job at it. And I mean, like, I think the Death Riders I think they're in good shape right now. I certainly think they're in better shape than any other faction in AEW at the moment.
Right.
So I mean, yeah, man, I'm looking forward to definitely seeing how Moxley handles it, capitalizes off of this for sure.
Yeah, and see how Jay White factors into where things go next. Mariah May cut a really, really good promo. I just want to mention, I can't really think of many people besides maybe MJF and way back in the day Cody ever really by themselves alone in front of the audience, in front of the live audience, getting 5 minutes to just talk. Like, it almost never happens. And I love, like, fuck the glamour. Like, I love the woman from hell. Like, that's the moniker. You know what I mean? Like, she is evil incarnate, and she knows it. And I can't say enough good things about her. I do wish she had been booked a little differently as the world champion in between winning the title and Toni coming back, but we'll get to that. Good promo, made me believe, and I think that's all you can really ask.
Yeah, Mariah May really, she really took AEW by storm last year because honestly, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't think much of her whenever she first showed up. I mean, I saw her in Stardom, but I was kind of lukewarm about it. But man, whenever her rivalry with Toni got started, the whole die Mariah die thing, I was hooked immediately on Mariah after that. And but you're right, man. I mean, they didn't do a whole lot else with her since August. I mean, she's been on TV. She's certainly been on TV a lot. It's just that, here we are, almost 7 months later, and we're still talking about the rivalry with Toni Storm. You know what I'm saying? There wasn't anything that happened in between those times, those events, where we can, say, oh, but this also happened. This is also, add this onto her record. I mean, I don't know, man. I get that, but I think that where this is headed in Brisbane is going to be special.
It is. It's going to be a big, big deal. And that's one of our main events for this episode. We're going to pull that apart a little more.
Oh, show,
they showed like 7 minutes of recaps before the main event. So that was a little annoying to me.
It was completely unnecessary.
Totally unnecessary. AEW just doesn't do that. And especially, why do you need to show me the outcome of the Jeff Jarrett match again? Like
once was more than enough.
Once was more than enough. Also, AEW never does this. And I don't want them to start doing it. You should be rewarded for watching the beginning of the show by, and they reshowed the Kenny Ospreay thing. It was like, they never do that when the men are in the main event. And pardon me if I sound like, kind of like an activist at this point, but God damn it. You have two really special performers you could have given 20 minutes to.
Yeah.
And instead they got 10 because we got 7 recaps of just unnecessary shit.
Or they could have hyped the main event too. They could have done anything else, literally anything else besides go back in time to the beginning of the show. It's like, what the fuck were we? No, other way, turn around this way. You know what I'm saying? But you're right. It was very out of character for AEW, and I hope they don't make a habit of it because Monet and Yuka tore it down, and the focus should have been on them, in my opinion.
Yeah, and so that leads us to the main event, which was Mercedes Moné versus Yuka Sakazaki. They had what I would consider a very good match that could be even better down the line. I think Yuka didn't seem quite as crisp as I'm used to seeing her.
She struggled with that tope a little bit. Well, not the tope. It was she was trying to step up on the rope at one point. She she kind of looked a little bit, I don't know, clumsy a little bit, but you're right. I mean, I don't know. She's normally a lot more. She's got it together a lot more than that most times.
Yeah, and it didn't really affect the match in an overly negative way. It's not, it was just, I'm used to seeing her look a little more sure of herself, and for whatever reason, she didn't seem quite as sure as I expected her to, but they had a really fun match. Mercedes gets the win, as we all kind of expected. I thought there might be a Harley Cameron appearance afterwards, and there wasn't. And it's just
what
awesome.
Was that about?
I mean, you're trying to build this thing up, but seeing Mercedes main event Dynamite, that's where she belongs.
For sure.
Mercedes matches should feel epic and like one of the biggest things happening in the company when they happen. And so, man, we could talk so much just about this, but we got so much to cover, and we're going to take a little bitty break, and then we're going to come back because something really epic happened on Collision that we just got to talk about as its own thing. We'll be right back. All right, Mr. J, Joshi J, Timeless Toni Storm.
I'm going to tell you right now, Toni Storm is a generational talent.
Yes.
I don't think that there is anyone, including Mercedes Moné at the moment, that is more interesting than her. Despite, Moné's 4 belts and everything, and as epic as she is, right now, this women's division in AEW is Toni Storm's division. And they are going to blow Brisbane's fucking roof off whenever she returns home. And her and Mariah have an absolute banger, which I would not be surprised main events that freaking show, especially coming off this promo that they dropped. I mean, that was special shit, man. It was one of the best promos AEW's ever had.
Yeah, it's one of the best segments I've ever seen. I mean, and I've watched this shit for a very long time. And there's 2 very special moments that have happened in this feud. Mariah's heel turn was about as masterful as you can do a heel turn. I loved it. It's so memorable. Toni bloody, crying. Mariah hitting her with the shoe. There was all that. And then this segment where the rookie comes out and Mariah lays into her, says, "You are nothing. You are garbage. You are a joke. You were the dumbest mark I could find, and that's why I used you. You are nothing." And Toni says, "But Mariah, I want to be just like you." And she's being Mariah back to Mariah, early days Mariah, and even puts her head in her bosom, and Mariah responds by beating the shit out of her with the belt. And it's brutal looking. I mean, she is just whipping her like you would whip somebody with a regular belt with the world championship.
Man, just lay the wood to her.
Like, that was just
God, man.
And just and Mariah's such a badass. She never looks actually genuinely afraid of anyone. Okay. So then they get all the security in there. And if that had been it, I would have been like, that was awesome. Right. That was just a cool segment. Right. And that they didn't even get to the best part. So they played this so well. So as Mariah is getting escorted out of the ring, held back by a bunch of people, you hear Toni over the mic go, "What makes you think I've forgotten? What makes you think our dance is done?"
With a totally different accent, totally different attitude. Just turned that on a dime.
On a dime.
Whoa.
She says, "What you've witnessed," they say the hardest role to play is yourself. And what you've witnessed is the role of a lifetime.
That was epic, man. Fucking epic.
Yeah. And she's like, "You may be the women's world champion, but you came from my womb and I will shove you right back up there." It was just masterful. I got chills. Toni's being a lunatic and ridiculous, and yet you feel like legit, you feel like, I want to see this. I have to see this. And she killed it. She killed it. I am so hyped for this match. Toni Storm is the greatest thing in pro wrestling right now. And that's somehow in the same era where you got Kenny Omega doing stuff, Will Ospreay doing stuff, Swerve Strickland, Jay White, Hangman Page. That's all people in that company. And Toni Storm is the one that I think is towering above everyone right now.
I don't think anyone in AEW, like in this so far this year, has held my attention that strongly than that segment did. Like I couldn't even get up, go get a drink, nothing. Like I didn't want to look away from the TV during that segment. It was epic shit. It was the kind of stuff you wish every segment in wrestling was like. And I mean, I think it's gonna be something that's just going to take both of these women to the next level. And I can't wait to see like how they blow this off in Australia. And but man, they're going to be replaying that promo every week, like leading up to that match to put that match over. And it's going to be a big reason, I think, that match is going to main event that show.
Yes. I don't think any other match could main event that show and be credible. Like, you could put Omega and Ospreay in the main event and I'd be bitching. Like that's what I mean. Like,
that says a lot right there.
That says a lot because those are like two of my favorite wrestlers ever. Not just of right now. But Toni is the main event. Yes, I think Kenny's the GOAT, like straight up. But like, yeah, that's where Toni is right now. We're watching her become, I've said this many times on this show, and I have an addendum to it, is Toni is becoming a legend right in front of our eyes, but so is Mariah May. And these two are making each other for a lifetime right now.
It's a very symbiotic relationship. Yes. It's going to take them both very far.
Yeah, I don't think Toni could have been as good as she is without Mariah May, honestly. And Toni's great without any help, but having Mariah May made her better. And yeah, this is just very special. And I think I'm ready to really declare this as far as just a gimmick goes.
Man, where are the rose petals, man? I got to throw some fucking roses
right
now,
man. Like, we should all be throwing goddamn rose petals, dude.
Hell yeah, man. Hell yeah.
Fucking Toni Storm, Timeless Toni Storm is my favorite gimmick ever. I love it. Because I don't think I've ever seen anybody commit to their gimmick to this degree that Toni does with reckless abandon.
I just hope she doesn't do it too well and Hollywood pulls her away from the freaking company, man.
We're looking at that possibility.
She is doing that good, man. She is doing that good.
Yeah, she could like win awards as an actress. Like, she is insanely talented. This is truly a timeless character, but Joshi J, it is time for our main event. And when we talk about timeless things, folks, get ready to take some notes because we are talking about wrestling history. And we are tracing it back to the point of the modern inception of pro wrestling. We're going to talk about the Goldust Trio when we come back. This is going to be a very spirited conversation. We're going to talk about how wrestling became what it is. All right. Well.
Are you ready?
I am ready. I've heard of Damien Sandow. I've heard of Goldust. I've heard these things before. And I just thought they were cool things, Goldust's dad is Dusty Rhodes. That made sense, right?
It sounds good, yeah?
It sounds good. It's kind of a play on the whole thing. And he was mad at his dad at the time and kind of made sense. And, Damien Sandow, I mean, it's just a douchey sounding name for a douchey character, right? Little did I know that the fathers of modern wrestling, truly, the guys who you can credit with so many different things, and we're going to discuss them. And we can, no matter how in depth we get, we can only give you guys a broad overview because these guys literally were responsible for so many different things.
We're going to try to give you a kind of a glimpse of just how much of what you see on television for any wrestling promotion on this planet is traced back to these three men.
Yes. Their names are Billy Sandow, Ed the Strangler Lewis, and Toots Mondt. I don't know if you've ever heard of any of those people, but you have now. And the depth and the breadth of what these guys have done is absolutely incredible. Let me give them an overview, and then we'll you have some just an insane resource of information here. So how long has wrestling been at work? No one really knows, okay? But wrestling that, Greco-Roman wrestling in the early 1900s and 1910s was one of the most popular pastimes in America, basically equivalent to like horse racing and baseball. And it was elsewhere in the world as well. It kind of felt like it peaked in the late 1900s and early 1910s when Frank Gotch from America, a young kind of country boy from America, feuded with a Russian/Estonian dude named George Hackenschmidt. And wrestling was very likely a work prior to all this. In fact, it's known that it was. But matches at this time were not at all like what wrestling is today.
They were presented very differently. Very
right.
differently.
There were no body slams. There was no drop kicks. Okay. Matches at this time were extremely long. They were often several hours in duration. And frankly, people in today's world would think they were fucking boring as shit. Okay. They're several hours long, and all they are is like holds. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Long, boring holds. You know how we refer to a headlock as a rest hold now? Like, imagine that for 3 hours, and then they call it a draw because they reached the curfew. There's no drop kicks. There's no body slams.
Yeah.
It's
they just
headlocks.
hug each other for 3 hours, man. Hugging and rolling around on the ground for 3 hours. And
yes.
That's it. You got your money's worth, baby. Yeah.
Yes. And so wrestling eventually, people got bored of that, and it declined in popularity. And it seemed to kind of coincide with the public's understanding of gambling and how much a part of gambling was playing into all sports. The
Everything.
Black Sox scandal in baseball in 1919 broke the nation's heart when it was revealed that many players from the White Sox/Black Sox had thrown the World Series.
Yep.
Baseball could have fallen apart completely, and then they got so strict they banned all the players accused and confirmed to have been a part of it from the game for life. They're still banned to this day. And pro wrestling, the work of pro wrestling, while it had probably been a part of it for a lot longer, the whispers from people were out there in a much bigger way. The world champion at that time, I believe in the late 19-teens, early 1920s, was Ed the Strangler Lewis, who was a proud and, very well-respected shooter, okay? He may have been working, but the dude could whoop your ass, okay? Big time. And he had been wrestling, he was like in his mid-20s in the early 1920s. And he happens upon this other guy named Billy Sandow in 1914, as I believe.
There's a couple of myths about that I'll get into.
I'm sure there is.
There's two different myths about how they met, but yeah, I'll get into that.
Lewis breaks up with his manager in 1914, and Sandow and him become chummy. Sandow was a wrestler of his own, but he was a very small man, 155 pounds or so. And he starts to manage Strangler Lewis. Strangler Lewis becomes a world champion. And there was one internationally recognized world champion at that time, at least the one who got all the headlines. There's probably other people claiming that they were the world champion elsewhere.
They weren't credible yet, though, yet. They wasn't to that point yet.
Right. And so he was the recognized world champion.
Yep.
And in the early 20s somewhere, either in 1920, 1922, they come across a guy named Toots Monk. And the three of these guys become what is called the Gold Dust Trio. Now, that is my broad overview of what happened. Why don't we get into some of those myths and what the truth seems to be? Because you are more knowledgeable about this topic than me.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of ways that I've read that this happened, because one thing you have to understand a lot, and you'd find this out trying to research this era of wrestling, because the thing about it is there aren't really any official records. This was all a work. I mean, there isn't anyone that during those years it was going to write down in a book, the actual history that was going on behind these exhibitions that they were selling to the public is legitimate, because um there's two very different ways that have been reported that Billy Sandow and Ed Lewis met. One was during the mid 1910s, during World War One. That was kind of the period the popularity of wrestling died down. Not just because of World War One, but also because of the death of Frank Gotch. After Gotch was gone, man, that freaking hurt the business. That hurt the wrestling industry so much in the United States, and we could do a whole other show about just Frank Gotch.
Yes.
But there's two myths about how these gentlemen met each other. One was that they met up. Basically, they were training people for hand-to-hand combat in World War II at some kind of military base in the United States. But that may be true. But the one that I liked was the tale about Billy Sandow previously managing Yusuf Hussein, who was one of the many men called the Terrible Turk. And I mean, there's at least 7-8 different wrestlers from the late 19th, early 20th century that used that name.
Yes.
There's a legend that Billy Sandow was managing Yusuf Hussein in Louisville, Kentucky. Came into a situation where he wasn't really sure who he was, who Yusuf was supposed to be wrestling that night, because Ed Lewis was already an established wrestler. Right. He was already a world champion at the time. Right. But apparently that night he was probably going by his real name, Robert Friedrich. And during this match, apparently Ed Lewis, a.k.a. Friedrich, just completely shot on Hussein. Yep. Just ran him over immediately. And according to legend, a couple of weeks later, Billy Sandow was managing Ed Lewis in a show in Chicago. And that was kind of how they got going. I'm telling you right now, if I was directing a movie about the Goldust Trio, that would be the first fucking scene of this movie. That would be how the whole damn thing started. Because that's a great way to kick it off. The only kind of real reliable resources that you can really dig up from this time period are from newspapers, because newspapers worked hand in hand with wrestling at the time. They had an extremely symbiotic relationship. In fact, kayfabe was more mainstream in the early 20th century than it ever was, because the newspapers would report stories about professional wrestling, and this would help the gates for wrestling. And the wrestling would entertain those fans who would want to go back and buy more newspapers to read about the stories and all the stuff that happened, the reasons that these people were wrestling, the reasons these people were getting booked. That's how those camps operated in those days. But eventually they did come across Toots Mondt, who is also an Iowa boy from about 3 hours away from Humboldt, where Frank Gotch is originally from. And they were both trained by the same mentor, Farmer Burns.
Yep. Martin Farmer Burns, baby.
Oh my goodness, a legend in his own right. His contributions just training Frank Gotch and Toots Mondt. I mean, my goodness, man. Like you talk about some very unrivaled contributions to this industry. Yep. But eventually when these three met up and they formed their own thing, essentially what this was the first wrestling promotion. Now there were wrestling events before this, of course. Jack Curley, for one, was a very famous promoter. His biggest one-off was probably the rematch between Frank Gotch and Hackenschmidt in Chicago Stockyards. That was a bit infamous, wasn't really received very well, has its own little controversy to go with it. But it wasn't actually a promotion because, for various reasons, like you said, these matches, I mean, dude, they lasted hours.
Yeah.
Like just one freaking match could run like 3 hours. And I mean, you thinking people these days, they think a freaking Iron Man match is like, oh my God, so long. Dude.
Right.
Like that's nothing, man. Like,
Right.
and in those days, bro, it was like, it was so much overkill. But they invented a style of wrestling, essentially. It's called slam bang Western style wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
And it definitely it incorporated elements from both the catch as catch can element, the Gotch and Ed Lewis were very proficient in, and but it also combined it with Greco-Roman and lumberjack wrestling.
Right.
Straight up fighting, but more importantly, theater. And
yes.
this created a completely different product that must have been received at the time in a very similar way to what WWE's product was received in the 1980s after Vince McMahon, incorporated his own, style into it. There were a lot of people that were like, "This isn't fucking wrestling. What is this?
Right.
This looks phony. This is bullshit." But I mean, it wasn't any less phony than anything that really came.
Yeah, so let's move back a little bit. So when wrestling becomes a work at some point, most likely in the 19th century, right? Where it's like way before Gotch and Hackenschmidt and all this shit, right?
For sure.
So it's like, why? Well, because one, you could avoid killing each other, and that means you can wrestle more, right?
You could book your superstars more.
Yes. And two, gambling. Because if you know what the outcome is and you're the guy who knows he's taking a dive, you can have a proxy place bets in your direction, because you know the other guy's going to win. You bet against yourself, and then you double the purse that you made from the match, and no one's the wiser, right? And that some have speculated that it even might be how they got the media involved, is they would share some of the information, like this guy's going to take a dive tonight, and the media guys would bet and make money too. And that's why the sport got covered the way it did. But, as we said, the sport is dying a death kind of in the late 1910s. As you pointed out, Frank Gotch died tragically young from alcohol abuse, I believe.
Yeah.
And Billy Sandow, Ed Strangler Lewis, who is the world champion, and Toots Mondt recognize that there's a lot of problems with pro wrestling that people don't like, that this slam bang Western style addressed. They wanted shorter matches that were more exciting with more exciting moves. They weren't as worried about realism. They're the ones who really created the concept of baby faces and heels.
Yep.
And personal feuds. That was all a big part of what helped them catch on. So yes, while you're right, even though there were those people who were like, this isn't fucking wrestling, the box office begged to disagree because they started making money hand over fist pretty fast.
They were killing it. They were killing it. And even their rival promoters, people like Curly and the Stecker brothers that did not like this idea, this new style that the trio that implemented. Like they wanted to keep it more traditional, but man, dude, they had to change eventually. Everybody started changing after that when they saw how much money the trio was pulling in from this new idea. I mean, they changed so much. They like just Toots Mondt alone, like his contribution to this was the fact that, first of all, he made the boxing ring standard in wrestling.
Right.
Like before then, I mean, if you went to like carnivals and stuff, and before then, a lot of times you literally watch these wrestlers on a stage, just like a regular stage. They made a boxing ring like the norm for, the platform for wrestling. The finishes, like the double count out, the double DQ, 90% of the finishes that are still used in wrestling today were invented by Toots Mondt. They were his ideas to extend rivalries, to keep them going, to have rematches, to leave things unresolved so you could book the same damn thing in the next damn town.
Right.
And I mean, even if you had, your groupies that like to follow you around, I mean, you were going to get something different everywhere you went. Sandow, his his most important contribution was were exclusive contracts. This did not exist before between the trio. This is essentially what made the trio the first promotion, because they were people that wrestled for just them all the time. And yeah, they had a roster. Essentially, they had the first roster, and of course, Lewis, he was the draw. He was the draw, and he would even he would throw matches, obviously, to create the chase, to make people keep coming back.
Yep.
Now you just like try to compartmentalize all that information, right? How much of that is still used today? How much of that represents everything that you perceive about modern professional wrestling? You guys were talking about, you, Joshi G, last week, like if you were going to explain this to an alien, you know, what is professional wrestling, you would be explaining pretty much all of this stuff.
Yes.
It's the theater element that this group introduced to the sport that reshaped it completely and found a cell that made it just extremely, made it the most lucrative business, the most freaking profitable sport in the country.
Absolutely. Well, and I was going to say, so, you know, so Toots Monts is the guy who comes up with the idea of a finishing move, right? He's the guy who's like, you know, what if a guy, when he does that move, the match is over, right? So this guy's like 30 years old, okay? He's like a young kid, all right?
Yep.
And he is a genius. And when the wrestlers start seeing the gates, so, you know, at first, Sandow and Mont and Lewis are just working for other promoters, and then they realize, fuck this, we can make way more money on our own. So Mont's job then becomes, he finds guys to wrestle Lewis, and he trains them how to do it their way, the slam bang style, right? And Lewis is smart enough where he's like, look, if I just win all the time, there's no drama in that. So they start having him lose the titles because they know even if he drops the title to a guy who doesn't want to drop it back, Lewis is so much better than everyone else. They're going to take it back. You just fucking take it from him.
And they're going to buy the ticket. You're going to buy the ticket to see the freaking Strangler. You out of your damn mind. The Strangler's in your town. Buy the fucking ticket, homeboy. You know where you want it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so they're barnstorming the U.S., Australia, Europe. They're all over the place, okay? These guys are traveling worldwide. This lasted approximately, and this is the crazy part, 6 to 8 years.
Yeah.
That the Goldust Trio actually existed. They split in 1928 when Billy Sandow's brother and Toots Mondt get into some kind of weird power struggle. And Sandow and Strangler Lewis split in the 30s because Strangler Lewis is an alcoholic and gets out of shape, and Sandow gets pissed at him. Wrestling carries on, okay, after this. But in those 6 to 8 years, they invent everything we know about pro wrestling, essentially.
Changed the world.
They changed the entire world.
Forever.
What wrestling it was prior to this doesn't even exist anymore, okay? The closest thing you can find is amateur wrestling, and that's legit sport. This was, you know. So they start the idea of the wrestling promotion. They start the idea of heels and baby faces. They start the double DQ, the double count out, the inconclusive result, the rematch, the, you know, blah, 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 blah. Okay? Everything you know about pro wrestling descends from these guys. And as if that wasn't enough, this is about to get real wild. Billy Sandow went on to manage a few other world champions. Okay? And then he retires. And then he dies in his 70s, okay? Strangler Lewis wrestled until 1947. So he was in his 50s when he retired, okay? He's the only 5-time world champion when he retires. Then he starts mentoring this young lad.
Yeah, who is this jabroni? Who is this guy? This
a guy I'd never heard of before. His name's Lou Thez, The guy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. The guy who became the next biggest wrestler in the history of existence for about 20 years. Lou Thez. That's being the guy who was the NWA world champion for 6 years. The guy who the first 2-time NWA world champion. Lou Thez.
He freaking was the NWA.
He was the NWA for about 20 years. And one of the most celebrated grapplers of the 20th century, Lou Thez was mentored by Ed Strangler Lewis. And that's why many people will tell you that the NWA World Championship and somewhat by proxy, the World Championship, the WCW World Championship, carries the lineage from Strangler Lewis and Frank Gotch and all those people. That's why they say that, okay, is because Lewis passed it down to Thez, who continued to carry it, right? And then this feller Toots Mont. He kind of ends up working mostly in the business side, retires as a wrestler pretty young, but kind of works with every major huge name in the business on the business side. And then why don't you finish us off here, Joshi J?
Well, this is kind of a funny thing, and it's like after the Goldust trio was finished in 28, both Billy Sandow and Ed Lewis head up to Boston. They start working with Paul Bowser, and they kind of keep going with the kind of the same thing, just with a different base. They kind of propped up Gus Sonnenberg, who was another guy that was kind of like he was a former collegiate athlete that they not really a traditional, not really ever trained in wrestling prior to working with them, but they kept doing kind of the same thing up in Boston. But man, dude, he goes to New York. The partners with their old rivals, Curly and Steckers and Fabiani out of Philly, but it's some of these other people that were also involved in this faction. Like some people may have heard of Jack Pfeffer, who was very instrumental in popularizing women's wrestling later in his career.
Yes, notorious scoundrel as well. Yes,
yeah, for sure. Tom Pax, but another key figure was also involved in this group. A man by the name of Jess McMahon.
Oh, yeah, Mick who?
Yeah, Jess McMahon. That McMahon.
This is Vince McMahon.
His grandfather.
K. McMahon's grandfather.
Vincent K. McMahon's grandfather. That's correct. The founder of Capital Wrestling eventually. What this faction in New York eventually evolved into in later years became the Worldwide Wrestling Federation.
Yes.
And it all started with Mont kind of joining this faction and taking everything there. The first person that they really started putting over heavy at Madison Square Garden in the 1930s, dude, during the Great Depression, they were pulling houses at Madison Square Garden with Jim Lundis.
Yep.
Jim Lundis is a guy a lot of people aren't aware of, only because it was before the age of television, and it was before obviously Lou Thez. And after Lou Thez came along in the 40s, Lundis was pretty much ran over in the history books. But man, that doesn't take away from how important this man was and how important this faction in New York was. This is what started the entire New York wrestling scene, as a staple. So, I mean, Mont is just, simply put, one of the most important people to ever exist in wrestling, in any era. I mean, his contributions to the industry are they're fucking unrivaled. I'm sorry. I'm not discounting. I don't. You and I and Joshi G, we don't watch the product anymore, the WWE stuff, but that doesn't mean I'm ever going to take away from Vincent K's contribution to the industry during the cable television. But all of that taken into account, I'm sorry, man, what he did for wrestling doesn't freaking compare to Toots. Not even freaking close.
Well, and there's some other components to this. So Toots is friends with Jess McMahon, and they start Capital together. But then Jess McMahon dies very suddenly of like a aneurysm or something. And his son, Vincent J. McMahon, Vince McMahon Sr., takes over the business in the 50s, and his mentor is Toots Mondt.
Yeah.
And Toots and Vincent J. McMahon are the ones who decide to leave the NWA and start Worldwide Wrestling Federation. And Buddy Rogers is their first champion, and he was supposed to be the guy carrying the promotion, but he has a heart attack.
Yeah.
Okay. And Buddy Rogers is a pioneer all his own. Okay.
And the Nature Boy, bro.
Oh my God. Buddy, we'll talk about Buddy Rogers sometime, but he has to drop the title. And Toots is like, hey, this guy, Bruno Sammartino, this is the guy we should push. Mm-hmm. Okay. And Vincent J. McMahon and Bruno had a big falling out before this. And he's the one that gets Vincent J. McMahon to bring him back and put the belt on him. And that led to, like a minor 8-year title reign for Bruno. And sellout after sellout after sellout of Madison Square Garden. I don't think there's another wrestler who's ever sold out Madison Square Garden as many times as Bruno. Not even Hogan. Nobody.
Well, they didn't, because they didn't leave. They were stationed in New York in those days, pretty much.
That was his territory. Yeah. So we could go on and on and on, and we will do this again for sure. And we'll talk about more wrestling history. But without Billy Sandow, Ed Strangler Lewis, and most of all Toots Mondt, conceptualizing wrestling as a spectacle that was not as based in realism, but was based in drama, this business that we all love doesn't exist. No. Period.
And the only other thing I would want to throw onto that is because, Joshi J and I being in Montreal, the home of one of the most infamous incidents in wrestling history in 1997. The craziest thing about it is it wasn't even the first time that happened in Montreal. In fact, 66 years earlier, in 1931, another thing that Ed the Strangler Lewis was involved in was a match against French Canadian Henry Delglaine. And it was a very similar situation where basically they're wrestling. Delglaine, there's a freaking championship on the line in Montreal. They were really wanting to break out and get into the hungry scene of the 30s. The thing you have to understand about the 30s, man, is it was rampant with these types of screw jobs, man. It was happening almost every damn month in some other part of the country or Canada or wherever. But in Montreal in 1931, basically what happened in the match, Henry Delglaine bites himself on the arm before the match, basically, and kind of wraps something around it. And then while they're wrestling, he kind of pulls off the band and he kind of shows it to the ref, insinuating that, the Strangler bit him. And so the ref disqualifies Lewis and awards the championship to Henry Delglaine. I mean, that is the original Montreal screw job, man. And it's crazy. Dude, most people in Montreal don't even know about that anymore.
No.
WWE wants to pretend like they were the first to do everything, but like I said, that was the original Montreal screw job. And I mean, the history of the Goldust Trio, we could go on about this for hours.
Yes.
But their contributions to wrestling is so deep. It's so impactful to everything that pro wrestling is today. And it's challenging because you have to consult a lot of different resources. The first book I would recommend for anyone that wants to go any deeper into it is Fall Guys by Marcus Griffith. There are other books, but they almost all of them reference this book because it was actually written in the 30s.
Yes, it's very comprehensive. Yes.
And it was Ken Zimmerman Jr. You can get some of his more recent books, his studies on Amazon. They're all very short, but you can get a lot of information about the Goldust Trio and stuff from them, but really, I mean, your best bet researching this particular era is really go to your local libraries, man. Like
Yeah.
go look at the history of wrestling in your area, go through some old newspapers, go find like some of the stuff that was published. You'll probably get some results, you'll get some really old kayfabe, but man, it's a challenging hobby to really kind of piece this particular era of wrestling together. But it really was the Wild West, man. Everything before the NWA, it was a very cutthroat industry. Lots of screw jobs, lots of really like the kind of stuff you see between WWE and AEW today, like you saw between WWF and WCW back in the '90s. Man, try to imagine like 20 different promotions
right
in the freaking North America all doing that same shit to each other.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It was way more cutthroat and vicious back then than anything we see now. I mean, and
for sure.
I mean, it is insane. Well, Joshi J.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much for being Joshi G's fill-in today.
You're very welcome, my Blade.
Sit down, shut up, mark out. Until next time, friends, I'm Blade Daly.
I am Joshi J.
Pro wrestling forever and ever.